Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode, and this is very very important because we will discuss food security and climate change. We have our expert panelist and climate change activist, Madam Beth Love. We have our other panelist, Dr. William, Professor David Smith, Professor Donald, Professor Rob, and our friend Mr. Stewart. I want to start from Madam Beth Love. How you want to analyze today's topic, especially food security? Already we are observing for this COVID-19 situation, many countries actually suffering for food security, and this is real right now. Especially many developing countries, even the African nations, they are facing this kind of things. What do you want to say, especially how we should work together?
Thank you very much, Sharif, for having me. This is a very important topic. We have already been living for many, many years in a world in which not everybody has enough to eat, which many people are starving and hungry. And the climate crisis is exacerbating that. And so we could easily look at it as climate crisis is exacerbating food security that already existed, and that's the end of the story. But actually, it's really much more complex than that. And one of the really important things is that climate crisis is both driving food insecurity, but the climate crisis is also a result of food systems and the way we source foods, and particularly the fact that we source so many of our foods in such an inefficient way by growing food for animals, feeding it to the animals, and then feeding it to ourselves. And so through this very inefficient system where 37% of our ice-free land is producing only 12% of our foods, the animal-based foods, and then 12% of our land is producing 85% of our food, the food that's being fed directly to humans. That's incredibly wasteful. And so we see that the system of producing food is actually set up in a very inefficient way. There's really good news on the horizon, though. There was a study that came out from the Eat Lancet Commission that found that if we switched to more plant-centered diets, we could feed all the world's people a healthy, sustainable diet and keep within our planetary boundaries, even as the population balloons in the next several decades.
Thank you. Professor David Smith, this is another crucial question for our audience, especially there are many people still they do not know how to measure the food security. So what is your answer, how we can measure food security?
Well, food security comes in many different packages and many different ways to look at it. And, part of what you have to do is step back and go and say, what are the pieces of food security and how you would begin to do that? Because there's risk at all different parts. There's risk in the growth of the food, both from the changing environment, but also the other structures around them. For example, in Haiti, which is the poorest nation in this hemisphere, their problem is they've farmed the same piece of land so many years without doing any land management on it that it barely supports growth today. There is, just so many different ways to look at this, but it's not just the climate change; it's the growth of people. The estimate is by 2050, world population will increase by another 35%, which puts more pressure on the land to grow and put it. The agricultural distribution on food is a place where, again, security pops up because you have to protect the food that's in transit as well, the food that's in distribution, plus the places where they are growing plants for animals and the water which supplies them are places where security vulnerabilities happen and need to be managed. Multiple years ago, there was these thoughts of terrorists poisoning the water supplies, poisoning the lakes, poisoning other things like that, which would go ahead and affect the crop production as well. So security is in many different places. We are now increasingly using digital techniques as we farm. Tractors have GPSs in it. They program the routes. You begin to see sensors put in the field to control how much moisture is there, other elements like that. All of those can be hacked and manipulated. And so again, security is a multiple problem across the whole ecosystem of food production. And climate change in some ways is making it worse. In some ways, climate change has in some regions of the world increased food production because their growing seasons are longer. So you have all those elements at play.
Thank you. Professor Donald.
Hey, I'm unmuted. Wow. Well, a lot of people are saying, that's not a very good way to start it. According to various sources that I've been reading, like Nature, one of the things that's interesting is that there's enough food right now, and it's a political problem, not necessarily a technical problem. There's food, but we're not getting it to people. I definitely agree with Beth. There was an article about reducing the amount of meat. There was an article in New York Times, I think it came from Nature, just the other day, that said that if we reduced our meat by 5%, the amount of meat we ate, that it would reduce the amount of greenhouse gases by 15 or so. I just was trying to find the article, but it's by quite a bit more than 5%, like 25% or something. It's huge, or at least so. We can be more efficient, and as Rob was pointing out, there's new technology. There's a whole science of farm tech, and there's newsletters that are available for that. So I get farm tech newsletters. But so back to observing that it's a political problem. Let me say just something that I just saw in Nature today that, I'll talk about that later. But anyway, oh yeah, what's really been good about greenhouse gases, I mean, is that kids have been suing. So Nature had an article yesterday saying that children, especially, have been suing governments, and it said the headline of the article, a good headline, was that lawsuits are going to save the world, and they're being done by children, but the governments are allowing them. So the oil companies and everybody have been doing everything they can to stop these lawsuits in the United States, but they're going through, and they are in England as well and other countries. So it's wonderful. When it's a political problem, it's different for every single solitary country. So the United States has a shocking amount of food insecurity, and the United States has the wealth to be able to not have food insecurity. But yet we have this attitude in the United States that if somebody is food insecure, it's their own fault, and they should just do what they're supposed to do and go out and get a job and make enough money. And if they can't make enough money working at Walmart, they should go back to school and, get a job being a software engineer or something like that. And so it's their own fault. And I will say that in the United States, that there's a huge racial component to that. And so that basically there's this whole attitude that African Americans are basically inferior and, stupid and therefore lazy. And therefore the reason they don't have enough food is because they're just inferior. And it's terrible, but every country has stuff like that. I mean, every country has social groups that are looked down on. India has the Dalit, and even though the laws pretend that they're equal, the long-term social attitudes and cultural attitudes make it so that they're not able to get food. There's enough food. It's a matter of the will to be able to get the food to the people who actually need it.
Thank you. Professor Rob.
Yeah, so some interesting stuff. The concept of reducing beef consumption is something it's being widely held now, that beef in and of itself.
Is it just me, or is Professor Rob gone for everybody?
I see you, Rob.
You do?
Okay.
What? Oh,
I hear
Rob
you.
off camera?
Yeah. Yeah, no,
I'm here.
everything okay.
Okay,
Yeah,
sorry.
So good. So good.
Okay. Wonder what's going on. So the beef has a significant impact on climate change, and also consumes an awful lot of land mass. It just simply changing the feed we're giving to cows has been shown to have a positive impact, a fairly significant positive impact on the climate. But of course, that adds to costs, and like any industry, the beef industry is driven by cost and profit. It's interesting to note that climate change has a cumulative effect on crop viability. The excess of CO2 impacts how much nitrogen the crops can absorb, and it reduces their protein count. So the food, while it's still being grown, doesn't provide as much sustenance over time, thanks to CO2 that otherwise would do. And then, of course, the CO2 weakens the plants, allows for weeds to grow. Then farmers have to use more herbicides and pesticides. Those are poisons that gets into the food chain and creates problems like cancer. So we're really on a spiral at the moment. The more pollution we cause, the less viable the crops are. The climate change aspects, of course, are turning parts of the world that once produced crops into relatively arid desert-like environments. And so we've got now migrations of people moving from areas that can't produce the food to support them to areas where the food is still being supported. And that's creating fairly big geopolitical problems. As mentioned, we probably should be looking, I mean, if we're looking at the beef industry to stand down by itself, that's probably not going to happen. That's going to be a force of government. And sadly, in a lot of areas, the beef industry is a relatively powerful organization. Here in the United States, it's very powerful. One of our most powerful commentators, Oprah Winfrey, was taken down largely by big beef, showcasing just how powerful they can be. So I think we're at the point now where we're really, as much as we're talking about mitigation, we need to talk about redoing farming, creating farm factories, which have proven out. You can put the factory in the middle of a city. The production per square foot is quite a bit higher in a factory setting, as we've discovered with marijuana. Surprisingly, a lot of the methods being used were developed with illegal growers initially, but have been adopted to farm factories, and your production can go up in a farm factory. It's protected from the weather. You don't have to use the pesticides because it's enclosed. You don't have to use the herbicides because you can protect the dirt from weed seeds, so they don't get the problem to begin with. And so the crops are not only more reliable, they're affordable, and they're far safer to eat because they have less contamination. At the end, we've got a global problem here with food security, and it does require a prescriptive response that cuts across nations and looks at the problem at the whole. And some of it has been pointed out as logistics. We are discarding a substantial amount of food that otherwise could be redistributed if we had the logistical capability to do so. And so we have technical knowledge on how to solve the problems. We have alternative ways of production that can solve the problems. We even have alternative foods that we could feed to beef animals that could reduce the problem substantially. We just are choosing not to do so. And the end result is this is probably going to get a lot worse before it gets better.
Thank you. We have our honorable speaker, Dr. Talib Rafael. He's a global leader. He worked for ILO. He worked as a Secretary General for UNWTO, as well as he is contributing a lot for the developing nations. So food securities and climate change is real for developing nations. Professor Talib Rafael, how you want to analyze, even you are actually World Talent Economic Forum Board of Advisor and Chief Board of Advisor. So how we can work on that particular area?
Food security is one of the most serious challenges that the 21st century has, without doubt. I remember the song that says, sympathy is all we need. Half the world has all the food and the other half sits down and quietly stuff. Remember that song. Now, the problem is that climate change is accentuating the problem. Definitely. But food security is another game of those that have it versus those that don't have it. I am very, very upset about it. I'm very concerned about it because many people are starving now. Many people. Half the people of the world are. And we're not dealing with it, we're not taking it seriously, especially in cities. Cities are very, very crucial in this. Cities are going to continue to grow now, whether we like it or not. But we can't get the crops from the farmland to the city. I'm in the south of Spain now. Behind me there is a fire. The ashes are jumping all the way to my home. It's because of the climate change that this and the wind that happens. Heat and wind is getting fire into here. This is going to have a serious effect on everything, especially the food crops. I want to say this now for now. The food problem is a very serious problem. And we can't turn this into a game to those that have it and those that don't have it. Like the COVID-19 vaccine. You can't turn it into a game that have it and those that don't have it. We all must have the right to eat. We must have the right to life. It's a human right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. For our audience as well as for our speakers, I want to just introduce that World Talent Economy Forum already we declared our board of advisors and our ambassadors. So we have around 50 people in our board, even Professor Rob, Professor Donalds, and Professor Talib Rafael, he's our board, Professor Donalds. And so those who interested to work with World Talent Economy Forum, you can. Example, right now, Malaysian government working with World Talent Economy Forum, we are developing resilient Malaysia concept. Perhaps this is one of the largest public-private partnership dialogue in Dubai Expo. So I will invite you all. And we have a very strong audience from some largest corporations and government body in Asia Pacific. And hopefully we can contribute, not only discuss discussions and open dialogue. Beside that, we want to contribute for developing a better ecosystem. Dr. William, you are a policy analyst, and how you want to analyze this food security. Remember that for resilient Malaysia, actually food security, we are giving a number one priority. So Malaysian government also focusing on agriculture. You know, Singapore and Malaysia, they are focusing right now. So what's going on this US and how we can improve that area?
Okay, well, I do have to say one, thank you, Sharif. It's always a pleasure. Two very large issues, climate change and food security. I'm going to get to a specific point that you raised, but on the issues of food supply and food insecurity, we can all go through all the statistics. It's alarming. My colleagues here are correct. We live globally about 35% of all food that is produced. That's approximately 1.3 billion tons, equaling about $1 trillion per year. We also, during an average calendar year, lose about 9 million people globally because they have no food. So they die of hunger. If we just focus in on the waste portion, we would be able to begin to cure the other portions. I begin with that only to emphasize this point, as was raised by Rob. And that is that the approach to this issue, the two main issues, both food security and food supply, as well as climate change, is really going to be a mosaic, and it's going to be a quilt. It might be a buffet of various choices, savings and efficiency on one side, looking at how food is actually produced, movement from animal-based meal plans or sustenance to more vegetarian or plant-based food is another part of the process. When Rob talked about marijuana, I know some people got excited. Correct in this regard, that when you then start to look towards the future with regard to food production, there are a number of different types of processes. One is agro farming, or I'm sorry, aqua farming or aquaponics, which is essentially hydroponics, which is what he was referring to, which is where you grow stuff without any soil. But aquaponics is slightly different because what they do is, and it's going to link up to another point, and I'll get through it really quickly, and that is this, is that we raise both fish, and the waste from the fish we use as compost to feed to provide and nourish the soil from which you grow plants from, And it's the soil and plants that absorb carbon. And here's the idea with regard to the link between food supply and climate change. Dirt. It's as simple as
Thank you.
No, hang on. Let me just say, dirt absorbs carbon. The process that we've had and what we're doing right now by cooling soil releases carbon into the atmosphere. It accounts for fully 1/3 of the release of carbon. When you start to look at the amount of carbon that's released by farming, by tilling the land, it's incredible. 1, 2. By putting compost back into the dirt into the land, and previously arid land stores up to twice as much water because it has a compost covering. So when we talk about desertification of arid lands across the globe, which is about 25% of the land mass of the globe, where we can't grow food, it's because we don't have a compost covering. And that absorbs the water, maintains the water, balances out our climate change and seasonal items, allows for plants to grow and contribute to the nutrition that's in the soil. So it replaces and nourishes the food that we eat. Right there is the inflection point. It is organic composting rather than the utilization of chemical fertilizers to use on our farmlands. So in the end, I know it sounds facetious and I know it sounds funny, but it's dirt. And if our audience will simply write this down, the leading expert on this is a gentleman by the name of Allan Savory, ALLANSAVORY. And please look it up and you will see that at the end, the nexus point where we're at right now is dirt. Because if we cure that piece, it has benefits both downstream as well as upstream, both with the climate and food supply. Dr. Sharif.
Thank you. Mr. Stewart, I know you have strong engagement with Malaysian local ecosystem, and I think your corporation also working with Malaysia. So we want to focus on developing nations. So because food security and climate change, the next challenges after this COVID and other problem. So what type of experience you want to share with us, and if you have any industrial solutions specifically for Malaysia and Asia Pacific, you can share with our audience.
Well, Sharif, one thing I can promise, and can you hear me okay? I had a problem with the audio earlier. Is everything okay? Yep, excellent. If I had a solution, we would be sharing already and resolving the world's problems. I would not be holding back, put it like that. I think the key thing here about this is that, you've picked two topics that, climate change, which is going to affect pretty much everything that we understand going forward, and food security, which has been around and as an issue for thousands of years. Food security is not something that's suddenly an issue today. It has been around for as long as there's been human development and people that have gathered in towns and low concentrated urbanization. Food security has become an issue because the one thing that you need is food, and water. Okay, if we combine the two. Without that, it doesn't matter how much money you've got. If there's no food, money and gold won't buy. You can't eat gold. So whether it's Malaysia or that particular region or anywhere in the world, we have the same kind of issues. When the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, first kind of produced their reports around this, well over a decade ago, they recognized the four kind of impacts that this have. And I think these are quite important to recognize. One is about food availability. The other is about food accessibility. One is about food utilization. And then finally, the final one is about food systems. And they all have an independent standing, but also an interrelationship that are so critical to us getting this right. Now, we've seen in more recent reports by the FAO around about how 14.5% of greenhouse gases are caused by meat production and livestock. We've seen some of the impact that we're having on the planet today by having a food system that is driving for the needs, and we're not necessarily doing it in the most efficient manner. Now, the outcome of this at the moment, and we've seen this come about, so when you look at parts of Malaysia, Southeast Asia, and other areas where we see issues around vulnerability, and vulnerability can be in other parts of the world as well. It's where we have low income, we have predominantly rural areas, but also can be urbanized areas, and where you have excessive movement of people. And where you're getting this, these two combinations of food security and climate change are having a very dramatic impact. Now, I think I kind of wanted to pick up one or two things that other people have said before we move on, but I do also want to look at it from a slightly more positive view. The fact that we're talking about it today means that we are intending to already do something about this. You know, we are seeing a lot of things happening that are both from a government perspective and society perspective, right down to the individuals. And I think that's the key thing we've got to look at. This is one thing, actually, that every person can have an impact on. Every individual can actually have a way of being able to manage. So by cutting your meat consumption by 20%, if everybody does that, we'll have a significant impact, we'll start to have an impact on maybe greenhouse gases. You know, all these things can start to have an impact, and that's really important. Just finally, a couple of things to pick up. Donald, you're talking about it being a political problem, and you're absolutely right. You know, if this was down to just everybody making their own decisions and us all as a community being able to evolve this, you know, we probably could actually evolve something. But this is a political issue here, and there's no doubt about it. And the politics will be the start and the end of it in some ways. You know, we have got enough food, but we're not getting it to the people. So we've got to look at the logistics, and which, you know, often can be counterintuitive. You know, what do we do in terms of protein production? What is the alternative to beef or lamb or chicken? You know, look at bean production. How can that be more efficient? How can we manage that? Now, the key thing here is obviously underlying, and people have already mentioned, is about technology. How can technology evolve this? And I think that's really important. But one final point, Professor Rob, absolutely right, waste. If we can't get the waste problem right, if we are going to waste 25% of the food that we buy at our superstores, do you know what? We're just fooling ourselves here. You know, so let's get that right. How can we be efficient? How can we reduce our waste? Now, great to grow your own, great to do this. Let's kind of cut that meat. Let's also look at the waste issue. Back to you, Sharif.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Adam.
Thank you very much, Sharif. I just wanted to second what Mr. Donald and Mr. Edwards said. That a lot of the roadblocks stopping us from achieving much of what we want to achieve as a global community, especially about topics like we're discussing today, social development. A sizable portion of the roadblocks we are faced with are indeed political. I'm sure many of us, if not all of us, have heard the factoid that a small percentage of people own something like 90% of the world's total wealth or something. I don't remember exactly, maybe the figures are a bit different from source to source. Of course, much of these are very emotive and hyperbolic, but it's something like that. So what do you do about that? I don't think we should eat the rich. Eat the rich is something you hear quite often in socialist, communist and anarchist circles. That I don't agree with. It's a saying that makes me feel repulsed and nauseous. You have every right to be angry at greedy people who don't fulfill their noblesse oblige, but we should be wary of going down avenues where they are dehumanized and we bring harm to them in a kind of purge scenario. Feel free to disagree there. Having said that, I think it's appropriate to segue into meat consumption, which we touched on a few minutes ago, a few times. I personally disagree that we should create a taboo, or maybe not a taboo, but around meat eating, pressuring or advising people into eating less and less. As a carnivore or omnivore myself, I feel the best I've ever felt when consuming meat. Certainly far better than I ever did when I experimented with vegetarianism and certainly veganism, but your mileage may vary. I know this clashes with some of the suffering abolitionist sentiments I raised in previous episodes, and it certainly contradicts what I said a few sentences ago about the motivations of the wealthy and our more self-serving and egoistic characteristics and qualities as human beings. Because my own preference for meat consumption does indeed come from a self-serving and egoistic part of my own character and personality. Of course, it makes me feel better, healthier, stronger, and with more stamina. So I'm not sure how I can resolve these contradictions just yet. Maybe I never will be able to. But moving on from that, another issue that sprung to my mind when considering this topic is water and water quality for everyone, particularly those populations in parts of the world where it's much harder to find clean water like what we are used to. I remember hearing about solutions like special tablets one can drop into dirty water and then tablet fizzes and dissolves away, and then voila, you've got clean water. I remember hearing about those when I was much, much younger. So where are they? Did these enterprises and businesses developing all these solutions just fold and disappear? So again, it loops back to what we were talking about regarding roadblocks being political and sociological, because not only do we have the means to help solve these issues, they've been around for a while now as well. I certainly don't think first world populations and Westerners should flagellate themselves, prostrating under the weight of guilt, begging forgiveness. I am pro-West, and whilst Western society, first world society, or whatever you want wish to call it, is not perfect, there are certainly an abundance of positives and innovations to be proud of and grateful for the existence of, thanks to the West, first world, Europe, Asia, US, Canada, and so on. Thank you, Sharif.
Thank you. I just want to Yeah, thank you. I just want to share one of our concept for resilient Malaysia. Maybe it can give a very good model for developing nations, especially because we do a lot of research, our policymakers, our partners, and the researcher, we are regularly working on that particular area. Especially, I believe that this is good model for this resilient Malaysia concept. The week 4, we're going to discuss on this public-private partnership, and we identify climate change risks for the following. Number 1, food security and agriculture. Number 2, sustainable infrastructure and construction. Number 3, optimization energy utilization in changing climate for manufacturing. And number 4, ensuring sustainable energy supply. So definitely, even our climate change discussions and the public-private partnership discussions, we will discuss on that particular points. And I believe that this is a very good model for developing nations, even though the Malaysian government and we are also helping climate change division, especially this 4 area. So when we discuss about climate change, definitely we have to think the specific energy, manufacturing, constructions, and food security and agricultural security. Professor Talib, you are a politician, you are a policymakers, and some point at present challenging situations, many countries has challenges, especially political situation not in good. If we see Afghanistan, Myanmar, everybody has a lot of challenges. So in that situation, what do you think? Climate change is a very big challenges. COVID, when we try to handle this COVID, we face a lot of challenges. So how politicians and the policymaker can be more effective for their country, especially for the developing countries?
Thank you so much, Sharif. For developing countries, it's a different ballgame altogether, because developing countries are on the receiving side of the food security. They're not on the giving side at all. It doesn't matter really to them what happens, as long as the country is not getting enough food. I disagree with Adam on the diplomacy of the West, because the West is really here, just as guilty as everybody else. We should all look at this world in a different light. We should see the world in a different way. COVID-19 is an example of that. When we insisted on the vaccine, for example, we forgot that some countries don't have enough money to vaccinate their own population. And some countries now, developing world, don't have enough money to feed their population. But that doesn't make their systems perfect at all. Not at all. Actually, in many of these countries, there is a class of people that eats well and have the luxury of saying, I don't want to eat beef, or I want to eat beef. This is a luxury, I think. It's not something that we can play with. I agree with Adam on that. I think that it's not important now, our eating habits. What's important is our government policies. What do we do about this? Because it's not an individual decision anymore. Individuals can decide not to eat beef, or to go on diet, or to eat healthy food. Some people don't have food altogether. I think that's a more important issue. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Madam Betlove.
Thank you, Sharif. Yeah, so it's been such a rich discussion, and there's a lot of things I want to respond to. I want to start by responding to you, Mr. Talib. I think it's those of us in the developing world that have the most privilege that need to step up here, and I really feel for you. And I personally do not take lightly that those of us living in places where we do waste a tremendous amount, and where we do have so much choice, that we are not necessarily as impacted by those choices as people in other parts of the world. And that's why I'm on a mission to make sure that all of the people of the world, I'm on a mission for the children, because the children are, you know, who I'm working for. I'm on a mission to ensure that the children of the world have a habitable world that they can live on, and that that we restructure our societies in such a way that everybody not only has enough to eat, but everybody has good, healthy food to eat, and that everybody has shelter, and that everybody has their needs met, and that we do it in a way that is within the boundaries of our ecological boundaries of our planetary system. And this is possible. This is possible. There are many models that show that it is possible for us to both have sufficient food and to be able to rein in the out of control greenhouse gas emissions, and stop the ocean acidification, and stop the bleeding of our biological species, the huge amount of biological diversity loss that's happening. There are models, there are ways that can do it. And guess what? It's the natural earth systems. Okay, so humans have come in and messed with the earth systems, and we're always talking about the pre-industrial age. You know, we don't want to raise the global temperatures more than 1.5 or 2% after the pre-industrial age, and people are so fixated on this fact that humans came in and made this huge spike in greenhouse gases at the beginning of the pre-industrial age, or that's where it starts, right? And the heat's going up, 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 and that's what we're fixated on. But honestly, humans have been changing the earth system for thousands of years before that by burning our forests, by clearing our lands, and primarily to raise animals to eat. And so even though I know that not everybody has a luxury to choose the food that they are going to eat, and I totally support people to eat whatever it is that they need to eat, on a systems level, if we're going to make it, we must free up enough land to rewild, to reforest, so that we can store, as was mentioned, we need to start storing carbon again in the trees, in the soils. This is has tremendous potential to solve both the biodiversity, both the food security issue and the climate crisis, as well as the biodiversity issue and so many others. And the other part that's really important is the oceans. We haven't touched on the oceans yet today. The oceans are our largest carbon sink, and we are destroying the oceans. And again, it's the human appetite for animal flesh that is driving this destruction, because we have overfished, and we have there's plastic in the ocean too, believe me, I'm aware of that, but we have totally overfished. And we are destroying the natural ecosystem of the ocean, and it is losing its capacity to store as much carbon. So we must rewild the oceans, rewild the land, reforest the land. And that is a solution. That's the good news. And guess what? There will be plenty of food, because we won't be wasting. The biggest waste is in feeding plant foods to animals, and then the very poor conversion ratios. So we get very little food out of that massive amount. Again, 37% of our land is being used to raise animal products that not everybody is eating equally. I must say, those of us in the developed world are eating more than our fair share. And then it's only producing 12% of the global food supply. But 12% of the land is growing food to feed directly for humans, and that's 85% of the global food supply. So globally, we're already plant-centered. So we just need to shift that more. And I'm not going to take away anybody's meat. I'm just saying, globally and systematically, we must eat more plants. Let me look at my notes. I want to say that there's more good news here, and that is that COVID, COVID was brought up several times, but these issues are all interrelated. The reason we have these huge global pandemics is because of the way we source food. This one came from a wet market. Other pandemics, zoonotic disease, have come from factory farming, right? So when we start eating more plants and shifting our food production toward more plants and less animal products, we're going to reduce the probability of getting these global pandemics. And guess what? The British Medical Journal published a study just a couple months ago that showed that people on plant-based diets, which was construed broadly, are 73% less likely to get a moderate to severe case of COVID. So not only will we reduce the incidence of pandemics, but we will also build our own bodily resistance to the worst impacts. So it's a good idea. And we can do this thing. And I feel very hopeful. I feel a lot of compassion for those that are suffering the most. And I work every day so that we can have that world that works for everybody. Please check out the Eat Lancet Commission. If you think that grazing is the solution and you're going to look up Alan Savory, I beg to differ with you, Dr. Bill. Please look at the report Grazed and Confused that I posted on the Facebook event, because it really, that solution is not a long-term solution. It might sequester carbon for a little while, but long-term it doesn't work. And it's always a pleasure to be here. I absolutely agree that it has to do with that it's not that we don't have enough. This earth is bountiful. We are charged to be good stewards of this earth, and the people must rise up and demand that our governments take action to create systems that are here to promote the goal of everyone thriving within a sustainable earth system, rather than our governments standing up to promote the interests of a few. Thank you very much, Sharif.
Thank you, Madam Bedlab. Professor David Smith, one point I want to hear from you, because you are expert on public-private partnership. Professor Talib also bring one important point: developing nations has problem of financing and other things. But if we want to focus food security and climate change, I think that we need a lot of investment. So in that situation, how we can make this public-private partnership more productive and more effective for developing nations?
You hit on some of the key points there, in that it takes a partnership to really address food security, and that you have to do it all the way around. Part of the change of the partnerships and public-private partnerships goes to the education side. We need to educate our children and ourselves in higher education about the impacts of the food security environment and the actions that can be done with it. Also in academia, we need to move more of food security into the research arena there. And as you get more in the research arena, what that lets you begin to do is actually do the public-private partnerships around that, where you look at the academics, you look at the government and regulatory parts in there, and you look at industry. Industry consumes a lot of the food that goes around there, but the waste of the food that's in the fields and stuff like that actually can begin to be used in, for example, biomass plants to produce energy without much of a carbon footprint. But also what produces there, the byproducts of biomass plants tends to also be fertilizer and plant and animal food, where that is stock that can go back and feed animals after it has had these other purposes. So you begin to see that full circle of utilization go around there. And the consumers have a place in that public-private partnership. We've seen food eating habits change dramatically, in which those have impacts as well, both positive impacts and some negative impacts. Here in Texas, I think we import enough avocados every year that we can feed a lot. But then you look on the other side in Mexico, where most of those are grown, the crops are diminishing and they've been overproduced, and the land cannot support some of the new production there and things. So it really is this ecosystem working together, and public-private partnerships are one of the very best keys in doing the ecosystem work together, where there are common goals, common roadmaps, and some regulatory that can help push the directions that way.
Thank you. Professor Rob, you are a expert business analyst, and beside that, you are working for many largest corporations around the world, especially US and Silicon Valley. So, Professor, my question is that how this largest corporation, observing these climate change issues or food security issue, what type of initiative they are taking? I do not only for developing nations or even for USA. If you give some insight from these big corporations like IBM's and other corporations.
Well, clearly the technology they produce is used to both model and address certain aspects of climate change. In terms of corporate social responsibility, for the most case, the programs don't appear to be focused on food security at all. So the technology is being used in that case. So, for instance, NVIDIA's robotics technology is being broadly used in automating tractors and farm production. IBM's Watson's being used along with some of the supercomputers to model global warming and look for impacts and help form the foundation for mitigating those impacts. But those are all commercial enterprises, not part of their corporate social responsibility. Cisco does address homelessness and food shortages in the regions in which they're headquartered. So in the cities where they aggressively go after this problem and fund mitigating factors. But I'm not really aware of any of them going directly after food shortages or food security. And I think for the most part, it's just because what they do is just so far removed from food production. We're talking about technologies that are based in silicon. Their expertise just doesn't reside in that area. Oh, I should point out, there was an effort from Cisco in Africa to work on the viability of clean water. That was a very successful program that went in and used inexpensive technology to both train the tribes on how to keep water clean and to put in automated wells that could be serviced remotely that would harvest the clean water and would continue to work. What previous programs had shown is that a company would come in and they would fund wells, and then as soon as they would leave, the wells would break down and the populations would contaminate their water sources. So what's made Cisco different is that theirs contained training so that the tribes learned how not to contaminate the water in the first place. And then the technology that was used, instead of being very advanced, was relatively primitive and in line with what the region could support. Putting in technology that was too advanced for region would fail because the region couldn't support it. So that made that approach quite a bit different. But from the standpoint of corporate support in this particular area, it's pretty light outside of that one Cisco example, and it was a fairly isolated case, even though Cisco is probably one of the most aggressive in terms of corporate social responsibility of the companies that I cover. It is interesting to note Beth's comment about a plant diet. The study is valid. It kind of strikes me, I'm kind of flummoxed that I haven't really run into that before, that if you're on a plant diet, it makes you more resistant to COVID. Certainly, it would seem to be more interesting to have that approach than taking horse pills, which is going a little bit crazy over here at the moment. So communicating that kind of message out to at least let people know that there's a healthy alternative for preventing getting sick would seem to be a great way to not only promote a plant-based diet, which has broad positive impacts on the environment, but also keeping people from doing what increasingly appears to be stupid stuff with regard to preventing the problem. I do want to point out, though, that we've got to be careful about listing all of the things we need to correct, because when you do that, it makes doing anything seem daunting. I mean, if you go down the list of all the things Beth talked about, all valid, by the time you're done, the audience says, well, we can't, the list is too long, it's too daunting, let's focus on something we can do. And if you want to address this, it's best to sub-segment, pick the most impactful path, resource it till you get accomplishment, and then move on to the next most impactful class. And it's likely going to be different for every country. But if you try to do everything at once, invariably you don't do anything, and then we just become a population of complainers where we're not making any progress. We really have to focus on progress. And that's probably another reason why the large companies haven't really gotten involved here, because it looks very daunting. It's outside of their area of expertise, and they want to see positive progress over a measurable period of time. And that measurable period has to be measured in terms of 4 or 8 years. A typical CEO might only last 6 to 10 years. And so you've got to look at projects that fall within those windows. Otherwise, you don't make lasting progress. The new administration comes in and undoes what the older administration did, or has a different set of ideas, and you never get anything done. So we need this encapsulated in bite-sized elements, prioritized with regard to the greatest impact, and then resourced so that you're able to accomplish what it is you set out to accomplish. And success breeds success. So as you make progress and talk about that progress, people become emboldened. They want to do this and they want to carry forward, as opposed to what we typically do in this country, where we talk about a whole bunch of initiatives, massive number of initiatives, we accomplish none of them, and people just get very frustrated. They don't want to participate, and it becomes problematic long term. So we need to move from really talking about the problem to focusing on the things that we can fix and getting those things fixed, so we build momentum to eventually solve the bigger issue.
Thank you for your excellent analysis. Beside that, I just want to share that Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they are trying to solving these like global growth and opportunities, and definitely they are also focusing on agricultural development. And what I understand, definitely the developed nations, they have this agenda and they are investing. I think Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is one of the big investors for impact investment, and this is definitely valuable for developing nations. Mr. Stewart, what the industrial fact you want to add, like when we're discussing about climate change and food security?
Okay, so just a couple of things to pick up with, because I think this is I think what's been really interesting, the topic has really kind of moved through a number of different focuses today. I think that's really helped us. It would be too easy, I think you're right, to drill down on all the things that are going wrong and then try and list those and try and make them all right, because one, they do interrelate, and therefore if you try and get one right, you need to solve all the others as well. But actually, we are doing some fantastic things out here, and we need to really actually kind of highlight those and make them, and people understand that there are some good things happening here out there. I think to start on a slightly more kind of somber note, I think Beth, you come up with some really valid points here. And this kind of being able to cope within our planetary boundaries, putting aside Elon Musk's idea of all going to live on Mars, which is, we know something a little bit different. We can do this. However, we are on a journey and traveling a direction whereby we will be challenging this. We have to accept that there is an adaptation going on here, and we are going to not be able to reverse what has happened. I mean, that is something that can't happen here. I think what we've got to recognize is that climate change repair, being able to assess and adjust, may take 100 or 200 years to get to a satisfactory position. But your point earlier, Beth, about the fact that the loss of species is increasing and accelerating to such a point that for us to get back where we were isn't going to take 100 to 200 years. It's going to take thousands, if not millions of years. So we are losing a biodiversity that we're going to have to adapt to as well. So we've got to start thinking a lot smarter with this. And I think that's where we're seeing some really good impact happening. So the money and investment coming from institutions and governments is starting to filter through to some really good projects and ideas. And also it's starting to recognize that actually focusing on the areas around practicality and technology will start to actually also get some big impact. One thing I'd like to kind of see, maybe thought about more, is localism. So, we try to resolve the world's problems, but actually if we break this down into chunks, excuse the phrase, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, maybe that's the wrong phrase to use in this one here. We shouldn't be eating elephants. But I think the point here is that we can actually start to have an impact today in front of us, but we can also look at our local communities. Localism has a wonderful way of being able to adapt, back to what we were very successfully achieving probably the last kind of 100 or 200 years ago, and actually creating it in a better way, how we can use hydroponics, how we can use different factors and ways and energy efficient ways of growing local, delivering local, managing local, and supporting community employment, all these different factors. Talab, you're absolutely right. One of the biggest issues we have is that there are people who are living on less than $1 a day out there, families that have no food, they have not access to clean water. So what can we do? I can't take where I am in an affluent area in England and pick it up and take it to an area where they don't have it. I cannot physically do that. And it would last for such a little time. So we need to have an ideology that translates to a practicality of something that's deliverable on a local basis. That will also help with refugee issues and other aspects. Of course, it all comes back to politics. But I'm going to pause there because that's a whole new game again. So hopefully that gives a little bit of thought around that, Sharif. Thank you.
Yeah, yes, thank you. Thank you. Professor Donald. Professor Donald. I think Dr. Talib want to add some point.
No, I just want to say it is
Dr. Talib?
It's a political thing without doubt, because people are not going to just, if you calculate the number of people that are managing their diets and exercising some restraints on that, the people that are hungry by far exceed that. There is not enough food going around. That's a fact. Governments have to bear the responsibility for that. And it is not up to each individual to do it on their own. It's a government policy. I know that Adam does not like to talk about leftist ideologies, but it's a fact that each government, each developing country now has to be self-dependent on its own, like we were before. All the food that came out of the country was capable of feeding the people in that country. It's not like this anymore, because the multilateral system, the multinationals, are taking away everything now. They're controlling everything, unfortunately. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor Donald.
I was going to say something similar to what Mr. Talib just said, which is consider the forest. I want you to consider two areas. One of them is India. Most Hindus are vegetarians, so you can't really blame the meat problem on them. They're a developing nation.
Exactly.
I look at Malaysia, and the forests of Borneo are one of the most biodiverse places in the world. They are beautiful, wonderful forests that are 80% chopped down now. Now, who is buying that forest? I mean, look at the balance there. The people that live in Malaysia and the people that live in Borneo make a living by chopping down those forests. But who's buying them? It's the multinational corporations that are buying them. And this is a place where government and politics have to be able to be involved, because these things are not priced correctly. If they need to be, if they charged enough for them to stop them or manage them correctly, then they'd still get the same amount of money, but they wouldn't be chopped down to the degree that they're being chopped down. I mean, and it would, like, you could enhance the incredible tourism industry to come for people to see these beautiful forests. And every time people start going to different places and meeting people from different countries, it changes their attitude. They're not as somebody said, it's hard to hate close up. When you have a dinner with somebody once, all of a sudden it's hard to hate that person or that type of person. So tourism would have still another advantage. So I'm just going to leave that as an example of a way that the government needs to act to be able to control the multinationals to actually make a difference in the world, so that we can start solving some of these problems. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. William.
Yes. Interesting discussion. We covered a number of areas. Yeah, let me begin just by saying just a quick a couple of comments and more so observations. First, Beth, I appreciate you joining the conversation. And with Alan, I think the solution there is that, and I'm gleaning into where you were coming from. I think the difference is that with Alan, he was looking at arid land. That is land that he was looking to reclaim when he was utilizing the grazing stuff. So that might be a distinction that we might find common ground. But that gets us back to what our colleagues have been talking about. It's that it's going to take a quilt. It's going to take multiple options, and everything is on the table. One thing I am concerned about, though, is that when we start to look at government being an instrument to force an issue, I think we have to be really careful. I think there are times when the government can come in and lead by with their purchasing power, lead in various other ways morally and speak out in the bully pulpit and things of that nature. But I guess the question that would be faced is at that crossover line where the government makes it compulsory in a fashion that seems as if it's rather than an encouragement. And so that's my only concern. But I do believe that the government has a role. Policy, certainly enlightened policy works in that direction. But as we know, that can change with various administrations. And that's just not exclusive to the United States. It's any country. We saw the recent coup in Guinea. But I think that the issue, though, is at what point in time do we use policy as an encouraging piece rather than a draconian piece? And I think that when we get to the edge, where it's more authoritarian and draconian, we might really run into problems rather than a full engagement of ideas. Sharif?
Thank you. Mr. Adam, I want to bring another point, and this is very important. Even the present situation, what we understand from Dr. Talib and all of the speaker discussion, that politics, policymakers, they are the important factors for solving these climate change and food securities. On the other hand, I'm also from developing nations. I'm observing talent people, especially as I'm working with talent economy. So talent people, they are not interested to join right now in politics because of a lot of, I'm very honest, corruptions or system error. So what do you observe? You are a transhumanist, and I believe that they have a different views and other thing. How we can encourage talent people in politics, and they can contribute more for their nation for this kind of big challenge, especially food security and climate change.
Thank you, Sharif. I'm glad you mentioned transhumanism, because it had an idea that looped back into what Reverend Beth was talking about. Yeah, so I just wanted to start off by echoing what Reverend Beth Love expressed earlier, that we need to take a holistic approach to all of the existential risks hanging over us, as well as the more lower level sociological issues. It's an ecosystem, hurricanes and butterflies and all that. So I think that's where the idea of a more knowledge-based economy could be introduced to try and compute the best approaches and ways forward. And I think planning a roadmap to get to this knowledge-based economy would be an ideal solution to try and attract some of the people you mentioned, Sharif. And it may well be that all the knowledge and information needed to beat the mega risk is obviously far more than one individual can handle so far, and may well be far more than even a team can juggle, even if it's a team composed of the people we mentioned. And it certainly requires a multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary approach to claw our way out of these forked crises. That's where AI could come in, to touch on transhumanism, could come in if equipped with enough computing and processing power to calculate and model and simulate and compute using all the repository of human knowledge across all disciplines, fields, subdisciplines, subfields, and spaces in between. Artificial intelligence could be the ultimate polymath Some humans can make very good polymaths like Da Vinci, but I think most humans make even better specialists. Maybe that's whether that's by nature or nurture or both or something else. I'm not quite sure. Maybe could all be polymaths if we were, if we were in the right environment. Who knows? And specialization, whilst being very helpful, risks tunnel vision, and alongside artificial intelligence, maybe prostheses like Neuralink will bridge together the best of man and machine. Of course, what could go wrong? Well, lots of things. But I think the road to a knowledge-based economy could be a good way to kind of like make those individuals you mentioned feel more inspired to try and tackle these issues. And I just wanted to move on to something. When Mr. Taylor was talking about COVID, it reminded me that with enough resources and financial backing and with a sufficiently structured and mobilized public relations campaign, there's nothing that we cannot do, and there's nothing that is unreachable if we unite like we did with COVID and vaccines. I would say I think the majority of the total global population are at least vaccinated once, I think. If I'm wrong, so apologies. But so a lot of the topics and issues we are covering today could have also been mobilized in terms of solutions by now and may have been shifted and finalized already with the same magnitude of social and cultural engineering and interventions as we saw with the pandemic and its subsequent vaccination operations. And I definitely think that the onus of responsibility falls on the planet's wealthy, or the super wealthy rather, and billionaires. I mean, there are levels of society, sociological strata above governments, and one of those is billionaires. I'm convinced that we would have paradise on earth, heaven on earth by now, if not for the super rich and their interests. I mean, it seems like I'm backtracking on some of the more sympathetic sentiments I expressed about these individuals, and I am backtracking actually. I do that. But they have gotten away with an awful lot, so it seems like an obvious solution, an obvious intuitive solution would be to impose greater taxes and enforce greater limitations and caps on wealth accumulation. Otherwise, it just freewheels and the chasm between groups of humans will fork so much that they become entirely new species almost. Living in extremes can warp certain characteristics. People living in one extreme have particular characteristics warp, and then other people living in some other extreme will have different characteristics warped, and you fork away into multiplicities. And the problem with trying to enforce such things is that a lot of these individuals seem to operate in a world where they are above the law, unfortunately. So people can try and enforce whatever they like, but if they can get away with a lot worse and more, then what? It's one planet, but many different worlds. The disparities between human groups are so vast. One planet, many different worlds. And I really loved what Mr. Donald said earlier. It's hard to hate someone close up. I love that. Thank you, Sharif.
Thank you. Dr. Talib, I think you want to add some point.
Yes. Just want to caution everybody from just speaking from a developed world perspective. That's what we're doing now. We're thinking from a developed world perspective only. The issue of the vaccine, for example, is not solved at all. Africa is not being vaccinated at all. It's not a fair world. The world needs to be more fair, more equitable. That's for sure. For example, the issue of vaccination now. Each country is acting on its own now. Each developed country that has money is vaccinating its people. It will take us 4 to 5 years to vaccinate 70% of the people of the world. Only then can we start traveling. I agree with Donald. Travel is a very important element here. Not only brings people together, you can never ever hate people that you've rubbed shoulder with. You can never ever stereotype about people like that. That's very important. But I'm again saying that it's government's responsibility. For example, we in Jordan, I'm talking to you from Amman, Jordan. In Jordan, we're living in a region that used to provide wheat for the whole world. It used to be a wheat field. Today we're importing wheat, we're importing bread. Why is that? Because of government policy. Government policies have led us into that. I do blame government's first place for that. Self-dependency is very, very important. We used to be better at feeding our people, not anymore. The multilaterals and the multilateral system, the multinationals, the multilateral system has failed us, unfortunately, Adam. Thank you.
Thank you. This is an excellent discussion, and definitely World Talent Economy Forum, we are trying to developing a better ecosystem for developing nations with the help of developed nations. And Dr. Talib Rafael, and we have all of the leaders and the policymakers and the corporate personality in today's discussions. Like G7 and G20, I think developing nations has to develop a forum. And we need to be more focused on talent people. We need to more invest on educations. And I request even the developed nations, do not invest your money for wire or anything. Better you invest for education, so you invest for healthcare system. Your hard-earned money will be helpful. We are observing Afghanistan and different issues where and this kind of things actually not solutions. So World Talent Economy Forum, we are trying to developing a talent economy with the help of all of the scholars, academicians, politicians, and corporate personalities. And I believe if you contribute in a proper way, we can solve many problems. Already different developing nations, even Malaysian governments, in different Indian government, Bangladesh governments, they believe that World Talent Economy Forum can contribute for solutions and other things. Besides that, I just want to share another things like this is very important. Please take care of the talent. Even developing nation, they lose many of the talent because they do not get enough platform or enough spaces or places to work there. So I believe this is the responsibility of the policymakers and politicians, Dr. Talibs and this kind of like Professor David Smith, Professor Donald, Dr. William, Mr. Stewart, Madam Betlab. Their voice is stronger than me and Adam. We are young. So I believe that we can develop in the COVID-19 situations. We learn many things. We need to be more focused on our national economy and the global community. We have to work together, and we need to be very much careful about our talent because many of the people actually deprived. Many people actually do not get enough support. What actually Talib Rafael said about vaccine, this is also important. Food security also important. Climate change is a big issue. We need to recognize it, and corporate need to more invest on green technology. Even though those who are oil and gas company, they can even invest right now in green technology. This is the way we can improve. So this is actually excellent discussions, day and night, 24 hours. We are working with our teams, and your contribution actually very, very important because you are our strength. When you join in World Talent Economy Forum, it's actually very important because all of the policymakers and corporation, especially small medium enterprise, grassroots level people, they're learning a lot. I just want to share. Indian governments from Pune, they are sharing their 1 million students with World Talent Economy Forum. Japan, Italy, they are developing startup village. They are also working with World Talent Economy Forum. Malaysian government, for they believe for resilient Malaysia, World Talent Economy Forum will be the best partner, and they have best knowledgeable person, and you people are the key person for us. And if you contribute, I'm sure we can solve many problems. So we need to work together. We need to work hard because many of the places in the developing nation is untouched. Many big corporations go there, many big NGO go there, but millions of people untouched. We have to touch millions of people. We need to help grassroots level people. So that is the way we can develop better knowledge-based ecosystem. So thank you everyone for joining today's session. I directly want to go for concluding remarks. I want to start from Professor Talib Rafael.
Thank you so much, Sharif.
Professor Talib.
I think you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right about young talent. But that's again a result of the government policy. Governments can encourage young people to stay there and work there with all their talents and opportunities, and they can encourage them to immigrate, go to the developed world, which is what's happening now, unfortunately. Young talent, food, climate change are examples of all of this, are examples of non-successful government policies in the developing world. That's what I want to say. It's all in the hands of governments now, unfortunately. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Betlab.
Thank you, Sharif. And thank you, everybody. It's been a very stimulating discussion. There's been a lot of talk about governments taking action, and I absolutely agree that in order to solve these really big problems that are interrelated, interlocking problems that are reinforcing each other, that governments must take bold, swift action. But what I know to be true is that governments will not act unless there is a sufficient will among the people to take action. And so I think it's incredibly important what you're doing, Sharif, with the World Talent Economic Forum, because we must have an educated population that is an excellent, very well educated population that is asking for, that is demanding the governments take the right action. The problems that we are experiencing are all as a result of being out of right relationship with the natural world, and orienting our systems around what benefits a very small percentage of people, rather than orienting our systems around what benefits the whole. And we do have the capacity in this earth, this beautiful earth that we have been granted, that is so worthy of great stewardship. We have the capacity for everyone to not only have their needs met, but to thrive, and to do so within the boundaries of the earth system. And there are many, many models out there that show that this is true, but it must take government action that is pushed by the public will. And you're absolutely right, Adam. There's an imbalance of power, because those people that have tons and tons of money have undue influence over the government. But they can't maintain that influence if enough people rise up and say, we want major change, and we are demanding it now. And that's one of the reasons I'm so excited about the youth of the world, because of the amount of activism that's going on around the climate crisis. And if we really do solve this climate crisis, the way we will do it will help everybody to be able to eat, because we cannot solve it unless we solve the food issue. So again, thank you so much for having me. It's been an honor and very stimulating.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this.
Before I go to Professor David Smith, I just want to add one point, because Professor David Smith always said, government, corporation, and academia, we have to work together. Government is not only is not enough, corporate only is not enough, and the academia also not enough. And beside that, World Talent Economy Forums, we are trying our level best. We want to do more research. We have global leaders like Dr. Talib Rafael and other speakers. We want investment on research. We want one education policy for global world. Because I'm from developing nation, I saw that there are 3 different policy: religious education, national curriculums, and there is an elite group of people, they go for international curriculum. That is the beginning of discriminations. We want to challenge this process, because without educated group of people, your talent is not enough. Your talent cannot contribute. We need good education policy. So we believe that if the global organization, they can help us, we can do better research, and we can find out the solution for one education policy. This is one of the major problem of developing nations. I feel that we need to develop a better education system. No choice. Because our discrimination starts from education, and without proper education, we cannot get the solution. Professor David Smith, I'm a big fan of your public-private partnerships. So how you want to analyze as well as give the concluding remarks?
Great. You took some of my concluding remarks right out of my mouth as you said that, because this whole public-private partnerships to support the food ecosystem. And ecosystem is a very important word as we look at food security. It's not just growing the crops, but it's how we prep the land. What technologies do we use with the land? Do we use hydroponics, which gets us more output from many plants per square foot than we do with traditional planting? Do we look at ways to use salt water that's desalinated as part of the way to increase our crops? So you start even before the crop is planted. You look at some of the public policy that I find very interesting. I was doing some work with one of the largest Indian tribes in the United States, and was on their reservation, and found something interesting. Along all their highways, instead of having pretty grass on the sides of the roads and in the medians, they actually plant a crop there to harvest to use to feed their animals. So they're not taking space away from places that can be producing food, but they're using the right-of-ways around all their highways and baling the hay to go and help feed part of their stock. And that's, to me, a wonderful public policy and approach to begin to utilize other areas that traditionally have not been used for things like feeding livestock and like that. The other really important things here is we have to do the public-private partnerships, but government, commercial, and academia is part of what you're doing. And if you look at the other portion of public, that you have to involve the citizens, because the citizens are the greatest consumer of the outputs from crops. They're the greatest consumer of the other elements that make up food security. And without education their involvement, it's hard to enact change that can have a profound effect, more than just incremental change. But to me, you're particularly right. You've got to involve that whole ecosystem. Last point on the ecosystem. The transportation of food actually produces a lot of carbon. So we need to also deal with the ecosystem and understand that after the crop is grown, it has to be delivered to market, and then from market to where it's consumed. Those are part of the ecosystem that must be addressed as well.
Thank you. Mr. Stewart.
Here we go. So Charles Schultz once said, "Don't worry about the world coming to an end today. It's already tomorrow in Australia." And I kind of like that, because it kind of just refreshes my point that we are on a timeline moving through. So what we mustn't do is sit here now and panic. What we must do is look forwards and actually think how we're going to resolve this. And I think what was interesting is someone sent me through something yesterday. I think for the first time since the early 1960s, the world's share of the top 1% of the population in the US is greater than the bottom 90%. So the 1% has more than the bottom 90%. So going back to what Reverend Love was saying, we need to look at how, a fairer distribution of investment and the way things work for the benefit of broader parts of society, because we seem to be still not going in the right direction with that, despite so many good things happening. Now, on a policy basis, policy needs to be less about solving short-term retrospective issues. What we need to see is policy thinking about solving long-term positive change. If we can understand how that works, we may start to see governments working across the private and public sector fringe. And David, I think you raised some really interesting points here. We need to see more and more development of this area between civic society, what people need, and the way government derive policy and change. And then we need to create a financial ecosystem that can support that. So we have a long way to go, but let's not panic. Let's actually do the right things and make this work. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Adam.
Thanks, Sharif. We've obviously not reached escape velocity out of the paradigm of predators and prey. Nature is red in tooth and claw, bloodthirsty competition, winners and losers fighting to the death. And I hope within all of our lifetimes, we have the privilege of seeing the world evolve into the age of cooperation and collaboration. So let's try and be on the right side of history, where our descendants will remember us with pride and inspiration as pioneers who helped usher in the new golden age. So yeah, thanks for having me. I didn't know what to expect when you first invited me to these a couple of months ago, and I've learned so much across a wide knowledge base since then with people from around the world. And it's a pleasure to join discussions with fellow Brits like Mr. Stewart. Sorry for mistakenly calling you Edward earlier. I do apologise. It's a bit embarrassing, but yeah, I'm excited to see where this takes us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Donald.
Seems that we're converging to a similar point here, which is wonderful. But what I want to point out is that no matter how powerful corporations are, governments are more powerful than corporations. So they can
right.
make laws that rein in the corporations.
Very true. Very true.
We need to understand, though, that to start understanding ways that countries can start working together, because rich countries are not working with poor countries to the extent that they really need to do. So we really need to strengthen multilateral organizations. We need to strengthen things like the UN. The United States is like trying to, withhold money from them and stuff like that. That's not what we need to do. We need to be doing the opposite. Now, we need to also realize that we are the government. We are the people that ultimately create our government. And when we look at something like the idea of corruption, part of what corruption winds up happening is that the multilateral, the corporations are able to feed us information that's incorrect. And I really support what Adam and others have said about the idea that we need to, the way I put it is price things correctly. What's going on now is that wealthy people, not just corporations, are able to make money on money. And so what they're able to do is to basically manipulate stock markets, do things incredibly like sell short and make money on the fact that the electronic signal takes milliseconds to get across the ocean. The most expensive property in New York is the property that's closest to the transatlantic optical cable, because they can actually manipulate the markets and make money. So why invest? Why invest in a company? That's risky. So when we're talking about taxes, we need to understand that we need to price things correctly, and we're not pricing money correctly, which is an interesting subject. So back to the thing about government, and the idea that we are government, I want to just say, compliment World Economic Forum and all of the people here, because there was an article in Science a couple months ago and that said that people talking to each other is a form of education. So the whole idea that world talent economy people are not getting involved in politics, well, I'd really encourage you to rethink that. I'd really encourage everybody to rethink that, because going out and talking to people that are around you and getting the people around you to start becoming aware of the kinds of things that are going on to them, the way that they're being manipulated, the way that they're being taken advantage of, is something that will be able to start causing people to make changes. The corporations aren't going to suddenly say, hey, we're being bad guys, we're going to start doing everything right. It's not set up that way. They have an obligation to make as much money as possible, and that's their only objective. So the only thing that can control that is governments. And the only way that we're going to be able to start having a system where countries work together is if we get governments that are willing to do that. And so that becomes our obligation as world talent economy, or the talented people in the world economy, is to lead in getting our governments to start doing what they need to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. You are also our honorable board of advisor. I think you are working on our constitutions. So hopefully with the help of Professor Donald and other speakers and other board of advisors, we can develop a very good organization for grassroots level people. Because from my personal experience, the big corporations and the big forum, they go to capital, they meet with prime ministers, and they meet with the capital city. But most of the cases, there is a many millions and million untouched people. So World Talent Economy Forum, we are trying. That's why our board ambassadors, they are working on that. So already many young people, many young talented people, they are joining World Talent Economy Forum because they find this will be extremely benefit for their development. So hopefully your contribution will be priceless for the youth community. Dr. William, what's your concluding remarks? Unmute, please.
You to unmute yourself.
Okay, listen, I'm an optimist. I believe tomorrow's going to be better. I'm always heartened when we get a group of intellectually cranky people together, because I know the ultimate solution is always going to be a step forward. I do want to say this, that these are seemingly intractable problems, and they are separate, but yet they're intertwined inextricably. But I would focus on the following: localized solutions and then regionalized solutions, because each area of the globe is going to be different. Each developing nation is different. As was raised earlier, some areas might do well to be looking at policy-wise, public-private with desalination plants. Other areas might be thinking about the notion of forced irrigation. Others might be thinking about regenerative farming techniques. At the end of the day, it's all hands on deck. Whatever tool or option, whether it's naturally based or inspired and utilizes high-end technology, is one that we need on the table, because that ultimately will contribute to, or the steps along in making progress with both climate change, food supply, and ultimately food insecurity. Food supply and food insecurity are two different things. But nevertheless, I am an optimist. I believe in this forum. I don't mind a disagreement from time to time. In fact, I'm heartened by it.
Yes.
Dr. Sharif,
Yes,
thank you again. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. We are optimists, and we want to be realistic, and we want to be a very good problem solver. Dr. Talib, what's your final remarks for young, talented people around the world?
Let me build on what Professor Dr. Williams said. This is a beautiful world after all. We have come a long way, and we should never forget that. If we compare ourselves to where we were 20 years ago, 25 or 30 years ago, we realize how much advancement we have made. I believe in mankind. I completely agree. It's in the hands of governments, but governments are us. We can make the government. We can force them to do things. So my advice to the world talent now, to the youth of the world talent, is be active. Be active in politics.
Mm-hmm.
Be active in making your government work for you. That's more important than just being a specialist on your own. Specialization doesn't work nowadays, unless there is a bigger view of things. The bigger view, I agree with Dr. William. The bigger view is that we are living in a better world today than we've ever been. Anybody that says otherwise is mistaken. You have to remember that only 30, 40, 50 years ago, African Americans used to sit in the back of the bus. Today, it's not like that anymore. So the world has changed, and the world is becoming better. Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. This is excellent discussion, and it's really thought-provoking. And I believe for our audience, it's really, really valuable. And thank you, Madam Betla, Professor David Smith, Mr. Stuart, Adams, Professor Donald, Dr. William, and Professor Talib Raphael for your continuous support for World Talent Economy Forum. And dear audience, share our content with your government, with academy, and with your corporations. I'm sure there are a lot of solutions for you. And by this way, I'm sure you can improve your community. Thank you. Bye-bye, and take care.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.